Good morning, Tri-Cities. It's Friday at 9 a.m. I'm Karl Dye, and it's time for Coffee with Karl. Today, we have a program that we've been looking forward to. We have guests on from the chaplaincy, and our subject today is COVID and the mental health aspect of COVID. So we look forward to a good discussion with our guests. I'll introduce them in no particular order. I'll start off with Brandy Hickey. Brandy is the Cork's Place Program Manager. Good morning, Brandy.
Morning.
Next up is Wanda Kontur. Wanda is the Hospice Bereavement Coordinator for the chaplaincy, and I believe that you work out of Cork's Place, maybe, Wanda?
I do, Karl. Good morning. I actually transitioned just recently out of hospice and only into Cork's Place.
Only into Cork's Place.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And last but not least is Tim Ledbetter. Tim is the Chaplain Supervisor and Senior Chaplain, Chaplaincy Health Care.
That's correct. Good morning, Karl.
I think I read too many things together there, but I wanted to get them all in. So thanks for joining us, Tim.
You bet.
So our ritual that we have on Coffee with Karl is to talk about coffee or mugs. And so I brought this one today. This, our daughter hand painted this, and I don't know if you can see it very well. It's Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and she did it, I'm going to say like 7 or 8 years ago. And it was after a trip to Walt Disneyland in California at this time of year that she and my wife took as sort of a, mental health break for them to get out of. We lived in Sandpoint, Idaho at the time, and in the middle of winter it gets pretty dark, and they were excited to go to Disneyland for the first time. And we were blessed that we could afford it and had a chance to go. But the mug reminds me of that time, and just, something that our family went through is sort of a, hey, let's give this a shot to see if we can break up some of the challenges. So let's go to Wanda next. Do you have a coffee mug or coffee story you'd like to share with us?
I do, actually, and it's interesting because when I started working in Cork's Place, their cupboards were stocked, where actually our program is inside of a house. And so the kitchen cupboards had full of cups and glasses. And my favorite one immediately became this large mug. And at the time, it had the word listener on it. And then also in the cupboard was a lot smaller cup, and it had the word talker on it. So because of my work, this became my favorite cup, and it's used so much, there's no more word on my cup. It's just worked off.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I like the size descriptor too on the importance of each part, right? That's awesome.
Thought it was appropriate for today.
Betcha.
Totally. Brandy, how about you? Do you got a coffee mug or story you want to share with us this morning?
I do. My mug today is from Silver Mountain. I'm sitting in a hotel room at Silver Mountain right now. We needed kind of a family break after the holidays, and my son lives in Spokane, so my oldest son. So this was a time where we could all come together, and we all love to ski, and just loving it, and love being here to be able to be in my hotel room and still be able to be a part of this. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you, making accommodations to join us. Tim, how about you? I saw you drinking out of a mug before. What do you got?
Well, I have one of the Starbucks mugs. This one happens to be Amsterdam. It has no particular meaning. It was the one at the top of the shelf, and I just want to confess that my wife has a collecting issue with collecting. We have got more of these mugs than I think Starbucks does, but it holds coffee, and it's doing just fine this morning.
Oh, that's awesome. At first I couldn't see it. I thought it had some snow on there, and I thought maybe it was a Starbucks special edition Silver Mountain mug, but I don't think they've quite gone to Silver Mountain with their mugs yet. But for anyone joining us today, if you're on Zoom and you'd like to ask a question as we go through our discussion, you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom. We'll go through those questions and be able to kind of work it into our conversation. If you're listening on social media, if you want to ask a question and put it in the comment section, we'll get to those as possible. So let's get into our discussion this morning. I want to start off with Tim and wonder, Tim, can you give us an overview of maybe people that aren't familiar with the chaplaincy and some of the services that you guys offer, and maybe kicks off that way?
You bet. Thank you, Karl. So Chaplaincy Health Care has been in our community since the early 1970s. It was a vision of several local churches, in particular Richland Lutheran Church is kind of our birth mother, you might say. So we always genuflect when we go by Richland Lutheran, you know, kind of say, hi, Mom. But we were started because of perception that there are some unmet needs that often fly under the radar in terms of people experiencing loss, and they don't know how to find a way to resolve that. People experiencing difficulty from medical issues, relational issues, sometimes being incarcerated or detained as a youth or an adult. And over the years, through a wide variety of programs and different types of professionals, we have evolved slowly. We used to be called Tri-Cities Chaplaincy, then Tri-Cities Chaplaincy Hospice and Counseling, and now Chaplaincy Health Care is our umbrella name that covers a variety of ways that we connect with people and support them, providing expert guidance and expertise and specialization in places, for example, where people are stressed. They might be stressed by a medical crisis. They might be stressed by a loss, a profound loss in their life. And that's where my two colleagues are very, very active, is helping adults and children especially who are affected by a loss. The loss may be, or the challenge may be through a difficult relationship or one's own personal issues. Also, when life becomes more frail and we're not as robust and we start to lose capacity and functioning, we just use the word frail to describe that. And then when life is coming to a close, and that's where our largest kind of flagship program now of our hospice program, whether it's providing care in home for over 150 people on a given day or families, or at the hospice house, our 10-bed inpatient facility in Kennewick, just above the Blue Bridge. So those are some of the ways that we come alongside families to help them do their work, or individuals to help them do their efforts to recover or to adapt or to try to reintegrate one's life. So we've been just delighted to be a part of the chaplaincy or the Tri-Cities community, and we look forward to continuing to do that. This actually, just a little quick thing, this is our 50th year anniversary, and so we're going to be celebrating that all year long.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for that overview. It's great. You know, I have almost been here a year, and I'm going to keep on calling myself the new guy until somebody calls me on it. So far I'll stick with it. But it's great to, you know, as a new Tri-City, and to learn about the resources we have, and what a tremendous asset for the community that you guys offer. Thank you. Brandy, is the Cork's Place manager, can you tell us a little bit more about maybe specifically some of the things that you guys offer and do at Cork's Place?
Yeah, it's always hard to follow Tim. We are a program under Chaplaincy Health Care. We were started 17 years ago when there was a need for children's grief care. There was prior to 17 years ago, but it was started under a really cool, it's a national, a grief center. It's called the Dougie Center, and they do a peer-to-peer based model that is children-led. We provide safe and supportive environment for children that are ages 3 to 17 years old who've experienced a death. We also support their caregivers as well, whoever that may be. And it helps them kind of talk within themselves to move through that healing process. We also provide support in the schools, quite notably after a suicide death. We call it postvention. It's an intervention after the death caused by suicide, where we go in and do a support group, some grief care for teachers, administrative staff who are directly affected by the suicide, along with family members. We provide training for the community as well. We believe that no child or family or any person should have to grieve alone. So all of our services that we provide in the community is free.
Oh, that's great. And Wanda, do you maybe want to kick us off and talk a little bit about, you know, as a bereavement coordinator, some of the things that you get involved in, and some of the services that you offer through chaplaincy in Cork's Place?
Sure, thanks, Carl. Before I do that, I just want to add some of our programs do collaborate with each other also in other ways. So like Tim and Brandy more recently attended a debriefing out in the community following a crisis. And so that's kind of a common thing that the community reaches out to Chaplaincy Health Care when there's different kinds of crises or traumas that have happened. For me personally, I have done primarily, I would say, I've worked with individuals, facilitated many grief support groups, taught many classes, done a lot of community presentations, sometimes on grief, loss, being supportive to people, or helping people know how to be supportive. So kind of both helping them to do grief work as well as helping them to learn how to help others. So really mostly just primarily focused on grief and helping people transition and heal.
You bet. Well, thank you all for that kind of overview and kickoff. Let's get into our discussion about, you know, some of the things that are happening related to COVID, you know, to people in our community. And I think we just talked about stress and trauma, and you know, it seems like that's an underlying issue with COVID, right? We're in a pandemic. It's a whole new situation no one's ever been through before. And everybody has a different way to deal with these things that might be the first time they're experiencing these things in their life, or it might compound other issues in their life that they're already dealing with. But you guys want to, I'll just throw it out for anyone to kind of kick us off on what kind of things, and Brandy, you talked about some of the teen suicides, you know, that have been connected to and attributed to COVID, and maybe kids not being in school together and stuff. But, you know, can we just kind of go around the virtual room and talk about what are some of the effects that maybe you've seen increase because of COVID in the, you know, very generally mental health services? It's just kind of a jump ball, whoever wants to get in there. I see Tim.
Yeah.
Well, it's the image I have right now, kind of across the globe, but I'll just be specific in our community. It's kind of the metaphor I've used is like we're in the last quarter of a marathon, and the encouraging words don't seem to help anymore. You know, hey, you know, we're in this together and you can do it and hang in there and all that. And I've never run a full marathon. I've run a half marathon. So I'll say in the last 3 miles of a half marathon, it's a grind. You're grinding. I'm trying, everybody is trying to just make it through. And what seems to be as important as anything now is not so much words of encouragement. Not that those are wrong, but I just remember running long distances and thinking, I don't want to hear anybody. But when someone would run alongside me for a while, and I remember doing that for my daughter one time when she was running the Spokane Marathon, literally. And I ran alongside her for a while, especially up Doomsday Hill, if you know where that is in Spokane. And we didn't talk, we couldn't talk, but somehow the idea of being alongside each other for a while, and I couldn't run her race for her and she could not run mine, but to accompany. So there's the word that I guess I'm thinking is as valuable as anything right now, is accompaniment, presence. Wanda talked about the more listening than talking. Absolutely. 2 ears, 1 mouth, that kind of thing. But accompaniment, being there together, I think is something that any person can do. You don't have to have words of wisdom or encouragement or inspiration, but not abandoning each other, I think is really huge.
That's great. Brandy or Wanda, anything to add and along those lines, or different thoughts?
Absolutely. That's something that through the last couple decades I've learned from grieving people, whether they've been through trauma, grief, and I'm not a trauma expert, so I'm not trying to say that, but they really don't want those extra words, or they don't want to be cheered up, or they don't want to be moved through or given a time frame. Tim's visual of coming alongside is really probably the most profound thing we can do, is to companion them, but doing it on their terms, in their time frame, with what they're wanting from us. So it's really much less that we contribute, and the less we contribute, the more powerful sometimes it can be.
You know, at Cork's Place, when we were, I would say, pre-COVID and post-COVID, pre-COVID, we were going strong with our groups in person. We were serving 95 kids in these in-person groups and their age groups, always telling them don't isolate, always reach out, connect. And then all of a sudden they're told to isolate, and whatever that looked like in their home. And we provide still virtual support groups, although it's not the same, you know, it's something. And a lot of things that we're hearing from these kids and these families, I can just share a little bit of it. We asked, you know, the question, you know, how has the pandemic affected your life? And a lot of them are saying, one of them, I'm working from home, but my husband's a police officer and constantly risk of exposure. Spending time with family is very stressful, and they've had to isolate within their home. And this is a grieving family who had a very traumatic loss, and now they are in their home because they're afraid that they've been exposed to COVID at all times, so they don't go out at all. And, you know, after 1 or 2 months, you know, you start really starting to feel that anxiousness. We hear that a lot, the limitations. Kids feel lost, kids feel anxious, a lot more stress due to the limitations. We're seeing that quite a bit in the virtual group. So we're looking forward to a time where we can all connect together in person somehow.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, the I guess just interpersonal relations for all of us, we haven't had a chance to be together as groups. You know, our team has been working from home since March, almost a year now, and I think we're all going through that. And then especially as you bring up kids in school, and not just the kids, but then the teachers, and, you know, just the effect of not being together. You know, are there some other stressors that causes that, you know, just maybe to go a little bit deeper on that side that we don't think about, you know, because we've never been through this, and so we don't have that shared experience of what is this like. But are there other, you know, effects that you're seeing, or you know, maybe within your realms that you guys are dealing with or addressing?
Well, it's interesting because we were moving so fast prior to being stopped. I mean, just going full speed, and then somebody just hit the brakes. And the world that we live in, where there's just a lot of grief, routine is so important for people who've gone through a traumatic event, where all of a sudden their routine of school and going to Cork's Place every other Tuesday and seeing their friends and being able to talk, seeing their friends at school, and all of the outlets that they had already formed in their routine stopped cold. And then you kind of were in a waiting pattern. So we were hearing that these families were waiting, well, maybe we'll go back to school, maybe we won't. Maybe, well, I'm going to have to go back to work. And then the guilt that the mothers or the caregivers felt by leaving their kids home the entire day by themselves, and the stress that they were having at work. I mean, it completely changed everybody's environment. And working in trauma and grief, change is not super good right away. And so missing that routine and the commonality and not feeling so alone, being with other people who are grieving, really caused a lot of strain.
Yeah. So any ideas or things that, you know, within all of your work that you suggest, or, you know, to since we know we can't be together, are there things that we can do virtually, or think about, you know, supporting each other in a virtual environment that kind of help make up for that routine, or get back onto, you know, a set schedule or something maybe that helps with that?
Well, I think it doesn't require sophistication in that sense, Carl. I really think some of the most helpful things for us as persons who are struggling, whatever our age, whatever our circumstance, and I'm just gonna, if I was gonna write a prescription, which I can't, but if I did, I would say walk with a bottle of water and a trusted friend. You can walk 6 feet apart, whatever. You can wear masks. You don't have to. And the trusted friend could be a human friend, a canine friend, a divine friend. But, you know, whether you're walking along the river or going up Badger or Candy Mountain or along just around your neighborhood, there is no technology involved whatsoever. It is so basic, and it doesn't require pulling together a whole bunch of people. You could actually both be COVID positive and stay apart and walk, maybe one on one side of the street, one the other. But you get my point that I think basic human contact where we can, obviously with compromise, but doing something like that, just, it doesn't take a whole bunch of people. It takes one other person, I think, to see me, for me to see them, whether you're just talking about, you know, the news or nothing or whatever. I think something basic like that is still available to us, obviously, and can really go a long way to help ease some of the distress. It can't take it away, but it can help ease that distress and kind of counterbalance it.
If I can, Carl, if I can just add, excuse me, to what Tim is saying, there is a resource, I think probably Tracy uploaded or made available, and if not, people can sure contact me. But Tim really hit on a lot of points that a man named Bessel van der Kolk talked about in a webcast that he put out in April. He's a expert on trauma. He's worked with understanding trauma for decades. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. But just a couple of points of what Tim was saying. Some of the things he talked about in that webcast are what are some of the preconditions for trauma to occur or to be set up, and saying that the pandemic is really, or the shutdown is creating those. And to Tim's point, some of those are loss of predictability, the immobility, why movement is so important, loss of connection, why connecting to somebody is really helpful, kind of a sense of loss of time or sequence he talked about. And there, if we can set little schedules for ourselves, loss of safety, Brandy talked about. And then for many, and maybe even more for elderly, a loss of a sense of purpose. So what he does in that webcast is, it's only half an hour long. You're invited to watch it. What he does is with each one of those, then he counters it with what can be helpful. And like Tim mentioned, he's a doctor, but he's giving very simple prescriptions, so to speak, for how to address these different things that we don't have to have a degree for or a lot of money. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And I, you know, this discussion, and we had a, you know, pre-meeting earlier this week, and it really helps me understand, and points we want to talk about today is, you know, how do we describe this? I think everybody knows what they're going through. I haven't done it before. It's different. It's new. You know, it really disrupts my life and work and all these things. But to put it in these terms of like stress and trauma, maybe even anxiety, you know, some other things that are going on is, you know, maybe that helps people understand a little bit about what they're going through. And then, you know, some resources like you just brought up, Wanda. I think that's a great side of it.
I've got a word for you, Carl.
Yeah, you got your technology going. You got your hands up. That's awesome.
Well, I have a word for you, and it's I believe it's an old Latin word that comes out of the monastic movement, where there was enforced isolation, and the word is acedia, A-C-E-D-I-A, acedia. And I've really been taken with that because it talks about this chronic sense of fatigue, malaise, aimlessness. We've talked about COVID brain, all these different kinds of physical and emotional and relational reactions. And I have found that word acedia has helped me to name what I think people in general are experiencing to one extent or another. And that sense where you just kind of stand and just sort of stare out the window and, oh, I got to get to work, or I got to get to the kids, or I've got to, you know, do all this stuff. And yet you just lethargy, fatigue, I mean, all the different kinds of things. And it's not a clinical problem. It's not that there's something wrong with me. It's because of this enforced isolation from society, from each other, from, as Brandy was saying, routines. But that's been a word, and a lot of times having an accurate, quote, diagnosis or an accurate word helps us to name, and if we can name what it is, then we can begin to respond appropriately, as opposed to just kind of thrashing around and, you know, yelling at people or just withdrawing even more and just shutting down completely. To have it, even if it's a tough name, you know, we've had people say, Doc, tell me what it is. I'd rather know bad news than no news, that kind of thing, because then we can deal with whatever it is.
That's a great point. I wonder if there, I mean, this is a side note and then I'll get us back on the conversation, but I'm just wondering to that point, you know, some of the things that as a society we've been going through since COVID started, relating to protests, political divisions, you know, generally kind of these things that are going on in society today. I wonder if there's some attribution to that acedia, right? I mean,
It exacerbates it for sure.
It makes it worse. And then you kind of layer communications and technology that, you know, we can instantly message, talk to each other, social media,
Mhm.
you know, do whatever. Then it's like it maybe creates the societal situation that we're in right now. And that's a great way to describe it. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'll pull us back onto our mainline topic. So how about, you know, just thinking of, we talked a little bit about families and kids in school and the changes that families are seeing. And then this concept of acedia, I even wonder, you know, normally as families, we're running around, like to your point, we're going to work, we're taking the kids here, we got to go to soccer practice, we got this meeting, you know. Now, if assuming that we're still, you know, employed, now we're doing all that stuff from home and we're not getting out and doing those things. And does that relate to what you guys talked about before in, you know, grief and trauma, that it's a change in schedule, it's a change in the pattern that really kind of makes things worse? And then is that kind of all connected?
I like what Tim said, because we believe, we always say, you know, children can deal with what they know. It's what they don't know. So to be really honest, especially with children, because all of this has created a really intense fear in people. The unknown is so scary. And you hear this new pandemic, and I've heard, you know, the suicides, as many as 4 in 2 months of teens. And that creates an immense amount of fear for parents. Is my child okay? They're at work struggling. My kid's at home. He's being isolated. What can I do? I think by having an open dialogue and asking hard questions and really acknowledging where we're at in life, not just with ourselves in our own community with adults, but with our children as well. And asking them the straight out question, are you okay? How is this for you? What can I do? And what we always say at Corks, you know, if you're lost or you're not sure what to do, go back to the beginning. What did work? And so with our kids, especially since we weren't able to do in-person groups, we acted fast because we knew that these kids needed support and they needed to connect with each other, because that was really saving them by being able to have really difficult conversations of their deep grief. And so we dropped off activity bags at their door with different activities. And then we all met online and did the activities together and talked with each other. And we really kept it going. And then we built on that by then, because they liked it so much, you know, you try a little something here, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, you adjust. We started adding in family activity bags. So we started having the family come together and do something that they were kind of forced to do together. That could have been hard, like asking hard questions with each other, but opening up that dialogue and communicating and keeping the conversation going is really important.
I think what I would add, if I can, Carl, is for me, having worked primarily with adults for all the years, especially like in Corks, it's a family-based program. So children, when we are in person, children or teens meet in their groups, peer-based group, and then the adult meets at the same time in their peer-based group. And one of the things that I've learned from them and from lots of reading is a lot of times we love our kids to the moon and back, and we want to do what's best for them, but sometimes we're not as equipped as we could be in how to do exactly to what Brandy's point is. How do you be close? How do you be present? How do you hear their grief or invite it? And then what we tend to do, I think all of us, is we want to give advice. We want to fix it. It's hard to see them in pain. We want to make it better. We don't want to really hear what they have to say because we kind of have our own agenda. And so I think a part of our work is being very sensitive to parents or adults, caregivers, are wherever they are, or anybody wanting to help another person, is you know, comes from a good place in their heart. But sometimes we just have to reframe what that looks like and equip people a little bit differently, kind of shift the paradigm of what's really helpful. And some of those resources I think Tracy has added also.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in the chat. The resources that we're talking about, some of the books and videos and articles Tracy's putting up in the side. So if, as we talk about them, yeah, they're there if people want to look them up. And I think that's a great point, Wanda. I think, you know, that concept of, I think especially in the, you know, the business community, right? If you're a business person, you know, you're trying to fix stuff, you're trying to solve things. And that's a great point, is that when we're going through these issues, you know, whether it's COVID related or other issues in life or work, you don't have to fix stuff. It's okay to come up with a good way to engage somebody and just ask them to talk about, and then get out that big listening mug and, you know, put the talking mug away, right?
Hey, Karl, can I take that just one step deeper as to why the listening is so important? I just absolutely endorse what Brandy and Wanda have been saying about the value of listening. Is that from my perspective as a chaplain, the distress, if I was going to name this distress, it's not just this acedia thing, but I would take it further to say this is spiritual distress, not because it's necessarily of a religious nature, but because it's affecting what matters most to us. And you and Wanda just now were talking about, you know, we loving our kids to the moon, and our work is important, and, you know, our commitments are important. And therefore, when that is stressed, I mean, there's physical distress, there's emotional distress, there's relational distress, but I'm talking about the spiritual distress of the impact on the things that matter most to us, that are most important to us, that we value. And the way to, quote, ease that distress, basically you cannot fix spiritual pain. But what you can do, and the therapeutic intervention, if you want the big phrase, is going right back to Wanda and her mug. And that is to listen with respect, with undivided attention, with a sense of honoring. And what you do not need, again, I'm borrowing from my colleague Wanda, you don't need answers. You don't need, you know, things to say. You don't need to try to turn the temperature down, but the act of simply being heard. I just want you to listen. Just listen. Shut up. Listen. Is what people, I think, desperately need. And the reason they need it is because of the spiritual nature of it. Now, it may have a religious component. People may feel abandoned by God, or abandoned by their church, or they can't find the answers they're looking for. But underneath that is this deep existential threat to what is so important to us. And what that needs is to be heard with respect, and no attempt to answer it or to diminish it, or, oh gosh, look at the time, you know, sounds good, but got to go. I think spiritual distress, again, is another word to accurately diagnose, in some ways, some of what we're feeling because of all of the impacts of the pandemic.
That's a great point. I think even if we're, you know, speaking to somebody on, you know, a virtual platform like we are, to your point, body language is a big part of listening, right? Like, don't fake it. Don't say like, oh, well, tell me what's going on. And then, you know, be giving them all these visual cues. Like, you know, I really don't care about what you're saying. You want to be authentic and carve out the time and just sit there and listen. And it's a great point. I mean, these are interpersonal skills we can all, I know I can do a better job at, but that's a really good point. And I think your point, Tim, is a great one in, you know, how do we use that distress or these other things that we can't really describe, but we're going through collectively, or as a family, or as a community, that maybe sometimes it's more of a process, right? And you talked about that on a pre-call about grief counseling and things like funerals are part of that process. But you guys talk about that a little bit, just like how does that work? That's, you know, as people, we work through these issues by process, that there isn't that answer, and you can't just, you know, fake having a conversation and then it's done and then we move on. You got to go through it. So you guys maybe give us a little more detail on that, and how does that work, and how does that work in the work that you guys do, you know, within the chaplaincy?
I love that question because I'm always, when we have tours, you know, business people come in, we work a lot on grants and fundraising and also the awareness. So when we have these tours and, you know, a CEO comes in for a tour at Cork's Place and they're kind of trying to understand what it is and what grief work looks like. And again, as Wanda said, our model is we don't try to fix, we really have no opinion, we don't justify or judge. And so when we start going through the rooms and we tell the stories and I'm watching these, the softening of people and then their own awareness, and they almost look like they were hit by a bus because all these feelings, you know, we say everybody knows what they need to heal. It's deep inside of you. Subconsciously, we know, but our minds and society are telling us what to do. Oh, I'm too busy for that. I'll work on that later. But it will come to the surface at one point. You know, we'll have a 50-year-old man come in and do a tour. And by the time he's talking about how his parents got divorced when he was 12 and that he's just realizing that's why his grades went down, or that's why he didn't get this, or, you know, somebody asked me I said, how was that for you when your mom died? Because he said his mom had died when he was 7. I said, how was that for you? And he just burst into tears because it's stuck in there. And what's so neat is when you get little kids, or you get to have the opportunity to actually authentically sit with someone and ask them a question and be present with that, to see the beauty that comes out of it, the grief work, the healing, the journey and the process, if you will, it's getting it started and becoming unstuck and kind of ready to start with that next part of your journey of healing. And it's a beautiful thing to see and humbling to be a part of it.
I think that, go ahead, Wanda.
Well, go ahead, Tim.
Nope.
I was just going to, as Brandy was talking, I was thinking of a couple of people that I have learned a lot from. One, Dr. Alan Wolfelt has the Center for Life and Loss and Life Transition in Fort Collins, Colorado. And one of the couple things he says that I love are affirmation precedes transcendence. The more we can just affirm and accept right where they are, they will then do the moving as they want or need to. And the other is the greatest gift you can give a grieving person is your patience. And he created a philosophy that all of his life's work has been founded on, which is companioning. So it's not about the destination, but it's really, grief is about being lost in the wilderness and not having a timeline or not knowing where the quote unquote end goal is. And like Brandy's saying, is really, really, really common that when we become more aware of our own grief and how to really more fully be present to someone who's hurting, and we can create that space for them, 50-year-old men, CEOs of companies. When Brandy goes downstairs and just talks about the kids' stories, there are often tears from all kinds of different folks, because they're accessing what they have had locked up because nobody did companion them or had patience for their pain. Another one quickly is Deborah Grassman is with Opus Peace, and their agency or their organization has worked with dying veterans for decades, and they created 2 DVD set that we often will show through work called Soul Injury is the first one. And basically what she talks about in that is that most of us have unresolved loss and grief, and many of us have guilt we have never dealt with. But her term, Wolfelt's companion, her term is witness. Like Tim was saying, be a witness to someone else's journey, to their struggle, to their pain, with no destination in mind. You're on the walk when he talked about going on the walk. How do we come alongside? No end point. I'm just with you for however long, and then we'll part. Maybe we'll come back together. And I think when we can take that on and learn how to practice that better, it becomes really important that we are intentional about when and how we use it, because it becomes so automatic. I will ask somebody in the grocery line years ago from my better skill set, and then they open up and I'm ready to check out. So it is learning, and
literally and figuratively,
and gaining the skills and the communication, but then also knowing when and how to use that that's effective for that person.
Good
What I
point.
love about that, just briefly, just to loop that, kind of close that out, is, you know, I don't want to detour anybody to come for a tour at Cork's because you're afraid you're going to be all opened up and not know what to do with it all. It's more of a, it's almost a sense of relief that you see on
Yes.
people, and just this weight lifted when you see them just share their experience. And the one story, just to talk about that, is a boy that came in. We have a volcano room, and it's padded rooms with punching bags and everything, and it's normally a big energy room, but for this teen boy would come in and listen to the other people's stories. 17 years old, his brother died by suicide. He was 15, and he found him. And his parents came to bring him, and they were afraid that he was going to shut down. He wasn't going to talk. He wasn't talking to anybody. He wanted to quit sports, but he would come to group every other week, and he would go in that volcano room and sit in the corner with a blanket, and a volunteer was with him, and not say a word for an hour and a half. And I don't know if you've sat in silence with anybody for an hour and a half, but it takes some work to not answer questions. And that happened for 6 months, and we only had a couple groups left. And again, the routine, he would do the same thing every time he came. And he came one time, went to the volcano room and sat up this time and looked at the volunteer and said, "Don't you want to know I don't say anything when I come here?" And the volunteer said, "Would you like me to ask you?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm ready to tell you." So the volunteer opened up and asked him, "Why don't you say anything when you're here?" And he said, "Because this is the only place in my entire life where I don't have to do anything. I don't have to answer any questions. Nobody's asking me if I'm okay. I can just be." And he said, "This is where I come to cry." He liked hearing the other stories of the other kids and their grief journey, and he was learning. But what that particular boy needed for that 6 months was to just be, and to be with himself, and to cry and be with other people who kind of knew, and to have a person sit with him for an hour and a half and never say a word.
Right.
Just move when he moved or breathe when he breathed, and just knowing that he was there was enough. And if we would have taken and just pushed it, "How are you? Are you okay? Why aren't you saying?" He would have just kept shutting down.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I like the silence and being present. It's so important. And you don't think you're doing any work or fixing it or helping, but silence is key.
Well, and it seems like in these stories, which are great, and I appreciate you guys, sharing them, that actually, not looking for the solution, not looking for the quick fix, but just having the presence, having the companionship, listening, are ways that you could actually fix it in the long term, right? Like when you have that sense of relief, it's not over, but it's the next stage maybe. And that's I think a great way to describe it. Oh man, I had a question that you just made me think about, Brandy, about what we talked about before. Now I lost it, but how about a way to engage with people that is the right way? I mean, and we talked about it before, but 100 years ago, maybe in the last pandemic that we had, it was pretty common to say, even in letters, like I've read old letters from my family, and ancestors and stuff, and they all talk really in detail. Like when they say, "How's it going?" they meant it because people got sick a lot more often, right? Like they actually wanted to know, like, "Are you well? Are you, how are you doing?" And we've kind of kept that term, but we don't necessarily really mean it as a greeting today. So, when you want to engage with somebody, you can kind of feel that they're going through something and you want to be that companion. You want to be the listener. What are some good techniques or ways to do that without like, "How's it going? Can I help you?" or something like that? Are there some ways that we could think about that, or good suggestions that you guys have?
Well, a big, huge, open-ended question like "How you doing?" I mean, that can go from soup to nuts. And as often is the case, it's even to the point, "How you doing? How you doing?" And that's it.
Yeah.
But you can focus your question. You say, "Hey, what's this week been like for you?" Or how are things yesterday? Or what's your morning been like? So that's one way to say, I have intention, because I didn't just say, "How you doing?" Which is just such a toss-off anymore. But I think you can focus it like that, and you can turn and look at them. And I teach student nurses over at the hospital they do a rotation and spend a whole day with a chaplain. And one of the things I tell them they can do, and we don't all have this ability literally, but they can take their stethoscope off for a minute and sit down and say, you know, I've got a couple minutes. So they just frame the time. How has today been for you? Say if they're talking to the patient, how has today been, or what's been the toughest part since you got in yesterday, or whatever. But there's this act of changing gears and focusing, the sitting, even literally or figuratively, and then narrowing their question tells the other person, okay, they're not expecting my life story. They're not expecting an encyclopedia, you know, resuscitation, but they really care enough. And that moment of intense listening, and the nurse knows they're not going to try to fix whatever the person says, unless they say, well, I could use another pillow. But that sense of, even in a moment, this person said to me in their listening, I'm the most important thing in the world right now. And 5 minutes. And then, oh, thank you so much for that. They put their scope back on. So whatever, you know, metaphor we could use, whether it's putting your coffee cup down to say, so what's today been like for you, Sally? Or something like that, are ways that you can let the person know this is more than just a, hey, how you doing? How you doing? And less than, oh my gosh, I got to give them my whole freaking life history.
Good point.
We say that because everybody's going through something. Every single person, you know, everybody. And so when you ask that question, we always, you know, when we train the community, we talk about compassion fatigue and burnout, and you know, what if you do have to make the question of, do you feel like you're going to hurt yourself question, or do you have a plan? Those questions it's so important to be in a space that when you ask the question, you are very ready to hear the answer, because you never know what you're going to hear. It could be, you know, my dad just died yesterday, you know, or something like that. So really being aware of kind of what you're going through, so you're not asking the question so you could tell them how you're feeling. Because sometimes that's what we do, is like, I'm going to ask them so they'll ask me, and then I can share what I'm going through. It's more of like, you don't have to do it with everybody, but if you're in a good headspace and in a good position where you can kind of reach out and genuinely help someone by just asking, I just encourage everybody to do it, because that feeling is, everybody wants to be asked. Everybody wants to tell their story in some way and at some time. And like I said, the relief is everything. Yeah. And it does take away some of that fear and the anxiety that we feel by holding it all in.
Totally.
A couple things that we use at Cork's Place a lot, and we train volunteers, and we end up kind of overusing it, to be honest with you. But the phrase "I wonder," to start out an engaged conversation with "I wonder," because it technically isn't a question that's requiring an answer from them, but it also isn't a directive from us or a teaching thing. It's, well, I wonder what's been going on. We kind of keep it general, open-ended, and then they can choose to engage with us or not. And so it's easy for us to use, and we use it so much that sometimes the kids will say to the group coordinators or facilitators, why do you keep saying "I wonder" all the time? So,
or they start doing it. They'll ask you, I wonder why you're asking me that question.
So then you change it to, well, I'm curious about how that is for you, or something.
Well, and yeah, and that's a word we don't use, just saying. We don't use the word curious, because then it becomes about us. But I took your point. Yeah.
Noted.
And the other thing that for me has been really effective is if that person, you know, Karl, you're saying what to say or how to maybe start it. If they've already kind of made a little comment, or maybe look like they're distressed about something, is try to reflect what you see, what you hear, kind of what you observe, because reflecting can make a conversation become one-sided for a very long time, just by reflecting or mirroring back what you are aware of. But we have to be open, kind of our stuff set aside, focused and intentional about, like Brandy said, being ready to hear what they have to say. So it just, I'm kind of noticing something seems like it's not right, or having a tough day. So I'm really making a statement, but my tone is saying, hey, I'll listen if you want to talk to me, you want to say anything. Or if they say, oh, it's been a really, like Tim, it's just been a really terrible week. It really sucked this week. You've had a terrible week. Or I might just say terrible week. I'll try to match facial expression, maybe tone, use some of their words. You can go miles in a conversation just by reflecting back what you're seeing, what you're hearing, or what you're sensing, and paying attention to that. Because you reflect a little bit, they recognize they heard me, they know what I'm saying. And then you let them talk for a while. And what I had to learn in the beginning is when I would do that with someone, pretty soon they got so into their story, they quit looking at me and they were just off and going. And I would think I needed to say something or interject. They just would talk right over me. So it was great learning for me, because it was like, Wanda, it's not about you. They're off and going. This is their time.
Safe
We have to
place.
say that a lot. It's not about you.
We do, yeah.
Is that, and maybe it's the same techniques, but Brandy, you know, like when you're working with kids, I mean, for parents who, you know, kids now throughout the districts are starting to go back to school more in person, or at least a hybrid schedule and stuff. But are there any techniques that work really well for kids or your kids, you know, just to try to engage them and, you know, just kind of use these same techniques, but, you know, within our own family circles? Are there any things that are more, you know, children specific that work better, or is it kind of the same things we've just been talking about?
You know, adults are just grown-up children.
Yeah.
So everything that works for, oh, sorry, Tim. You know, like we all were kids once. We're all kids once, you know, and they're so honest. I wish we were more honest, you know, and we put our, we've learned really quick with our training is don't put your own assumptions in on anything. So when I had a little boy drawing this and he was really intent with it and it was very detailed. And I, instead of asking an open-ended question, I said, "Oh, is that your dog?" And he said, "That's me." So, I mean, I thought it was his dog and it was a picture he was drawing of himself. And I thought, ooh, I get my hand slapped for that one. When instead I said, what are you drawing? Let's talk about it. And taking ourselves out of the equation and our own prejudgment and our own societal opinions and our own thoughts. And even as parents, you know, the way I parent my own kids, Wanda put me on a book called, if I say it wrong, let me know. I know it's in the resources, Talking So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk.
Oh, yeah.
I read that thing over and over and over again because I am naturally a fixer. And so everything that my kids are going through or other kids are going through, I just want to fix it because I don't want them to hurt. I don't want them to feel strain. I don't want this process of them going back to school to cause more stress. So then I just try to fix it all by doing it on myself and presuming that they're struggling with it, when in reality, they're excited. So the open-ended questions, and if they ask for your opinion, then give it. But 90% of the time, they already know what they want to do anyways. But just giving them room and validation, you know, in some level, it's just taking their lead is the best advice. Not that we give advice, Wanda, but the best thing that I've learned is taking a child's lead or a person's lead,
Right.
And just doing what they feel that they need to do and validating that is everything.
Oh, that's great. You know, we're down to about 5 minutes, but I had one more question that I think we talked a little bit about before, but, you know, just describing what folks are going through because of COVID, because of the isolation, because of the change in schedule. On some level, maybe it is traumatic. Maybe there is trauma related on some level, but, you know, you talked about some of the veterans groups, Wanda, that you work with, and thinking about veterans specifically and PTSD, you know, post-traumatic stress syndrome. As we come out of COVID, as we get more inoculations and we kind of go back to a regular schedule, whatever that looks like, it'll probably be different. But should we be aware of you know, if folks that we work with or in our families or something aren't able to deal with trauma and stress, well, could there be some of those post-traumatic stress, you know, symptoms? And is there any different way to address that? Or is it really just what we've been talking about engaging and listening and these things? Is it the same things maybe that we can do for each other that, you know, are now during the crisis or after? Are they the same things, or are there different things we should think about?
I guess what just comes to mind, and Tim and Brandy can certainly add to this, but what we all have been just talking about is going to be effective anywhere, anytime, with anybody, kind of as a starting point and as a foundational thing that's, I guess, relatively simple. And I think we just need to be more intentional about it, because I'm not sure once this is kind of abated a little bit, that the need is going to go down. It may actually go up as people have kind of a sense of more relief. And it's almost like maybe this tidal wave will come. I don't think our therapists are going to be any more free once this ends. They're busy now and will be busier. So whether it's we just hone up our own skills, or we have some resources available, or websites that we can refer people to, I think this is just such a great place to start. But I'll defer the other comments to Brandy or Tim about that.
I absolutely agree with Wanda. It's almost like coming out of the darkness, blinking into the light as we go, and wondering, what is this strange new world post-COVID going to look like? What can we trust in terms of, do we still mask? Do we still practice, our social distancing? Once people have either had the disease or have been vaccinated, I think there's going to be some kind of tenuousness. Can we all get together safely, or do we continue to practice? And maybe that caution is going to serve us well, that we don't just barge into the quote unquote the good old days, but maybe we can actually incorporate some things that we have learned. I know at the chaplaincy, for example, we used to have what we called an in-person stand-up meeting every Monday morning. Well, it only involved about a third of the agency, the ones that worked at our main building. So since then, over the last 11 months, we've been having what we call Monday morning meeting, which is a Teams meeting for the whole agency. And suddenly all 150 people, whether they work nights or days or this building or that building or whatever, can tune in. We usually leave our screens off in case it's, we're not at our best, but we can listen in. And that's built actually a greater sense of community just in our agency than before, which was pretty much just hospice and administrative folks who would, stand around and look at each other. And so we're going to continue to do that. And I think there'll be ways that we can incorporate some of the learnings, whether it was, as Wanda and Brandy have said, our listening skills are better now, and to not assume things like that. I think we're going to be able to take some of these lessons and apply them into the new day, as the days literally and figuratively grow longer.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, we are down to 1 minute, so I'd like to give all of you guys a chance to make any closing remarks that you do, but I just want to thank you all for your time, and Brandy, especially for joining us on your, getting out of town day, but we appreciate all your time. And this has been a great conversation. Hopefully, we have discussed some great techniques and things to consider and think about for all of us in our family and our work and our, as a greater community. So thanks in advance for your time, but let's maybe start off with Wanda to see if you have any closing remarks.
I just wrote out something because I wouldn't have memorized it from last night to this morning. I just want to say that collectively, whoever's listening, I think our agency, we really do have a profound opportunity to help other people by owning our own losses, our own woundedness, by trying to really understand what grief is and isn't, by learning how to effectively companion hurting people through their struggles, while allowing them to determine the time frame and the terms of that journey we're taking together.
That's great and really well said. Thanks, Wanda, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Brandy, how about you? Do you have anything you want to leave us with?
Well, that's hard to follow because that was just beautiful, Wanda. I just would encourage anybody who is struggling to reach out. We're all trying to navigate this. And as Tim said, we're in the darkness and we're all coming out into the light. And we're so fortunate in the Tri-Cities to have so many resources to reach out, chaplaincy being one of them. Just ask for help. There's people out there that can help.
That's awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy some good powder, hopefully.
Thank you.
Tim, how about you? You have some words to wrap us up with?
Well, you heard me chuckling. I think laughter, I think humor grounds us. It helps us to embrace something without it overwhelming us. It kind of keeps it arm's length, but we can look at it. So laughing together, enjoying, making fun of ourselves, making fun of, the different experiences. I'm not talking about destructive, harmful humor, but I'm talking about that grounding humor that says, yeah, this sucks, and what can we do? But the other thing, there's another agency that all of us are familiar with at the chaplaincy. It's called the Sacred Art of Living and Dying down in Bend, Oregon. And they have been a real leader, and we have utilized their resources constantly, in addition to the ones that Wanda has mentioned, as a way of learning about ourselves as people who live and people who die and people who gain and people who lose. And the last little phrase I want to leave is a phrase from Richard Groves, who is the director, and that is that pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Pain that is not transformed is transmitted. And that's not just a snappy thing, but it is an awareness. And I'm going back to the 50-year-old guy that Brandy was talking about, who was touring Cork's place. And we realize sometimes that we have been carrying pain and even transmitting that pain because we had no idea how to transform it. And I'll bet you money, even that person that day, there was a little bit of a transformational shift where it took on a new form, and we can begin to own some of these pains. So this is not just about kids, although that's a fabulous way to start learning how to engage life and the painful parts of life, but to transform at any stage of life, even at the bedside of a loved one who's dying, can help us begin to transform our pain so that we don't transmit it, often in ways that we have no idea we've been doing. So that's what our agency really is about, is trying to help people transform a lot of those different types of pain, often through loss or other kinds of conflicts, and so that we don't transmit that, but instead we transmit the health and vitality and healing possibilities that are inherent within each of us and within our community.
That's really well said. And that's a great way to put it. I want to thank all of you for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us and having this conversation. It's a tough one for all of us to have. You guys deal with that on a regular basis, but I think you've given us some good suggestions and insights on how we can help each other. And that's a great way to leave it. So thanks for your time today. Appreciate you joining us. And for everybody else, we'll be back next Friday with more Coffee with Karl. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.